He said it out loud. That is the part nobody was prepared for. In a sport where the unwritten rules run almost as deep as the written ones, where players protect relationships, guard locker room dynamics, and carefully manage the language they use in public about teammates and situations, Will Rushing sat in front of a microphone and said the quiet part loudly enough for the entire baseball world to hear it. He said, "Honestly, I don't want to catch Shohei's pitches anymore. Not off the record. Not in a leaked text message or an anonymous source whispering to a beat reporter in a stadium corridor. Out loud. On record. With his name attached to every syllable." The room didn't gasp. It went somewhere quieter than a gasp. It went to the particular silence that descends when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, when a door has been opened that everyone in the room instinctively understands will never fully close again. And within 48 hours, the Dodgers GM was standing at a podium announcing a new catcher, a 3-year contract, and the beginning of something that the organization hopes will change the entire complexion of what Shohei Ohtani is capable of on a baseball mound. But before we get to who that catcher is, we need to understand how it got to this point. The signs had been there for weeks. Not in the dramatic, visible way that organizational fractures sometimes announce themselves. Not in blown coverages or passed balls or public arguments on the field that give television cameras something to zoom in on. The signs were quieter than that. More internal. The kind that only become legible in retrospect, once you know what you were looking at. People inside the Dodgers organization describe it now, carefully and with the protective language of people who are still employed by the team, as a relationship that had simply reached its natural limit. That Rushing was a good catcher, a professional, a competitor, a man who had prepared seriously and given genuine effort to the specific and demanding challenge of catching one of the most complex pitching arsenals in modern baseball. But good, in this context, was not enough. Because catching Ohtani is not a standard professional assignment. It is not something that fits inside the normal framework of what a major league catcher is asked to do. The velocity alone, the sustained 163, 164 km/h fastballs that Ohtani produces not as exceptional moments but as routine features of a standard outing, demands a physical and psychological readiness that operates at a different frequency from what most catching assignments require. Add the movement. Add the sweeper that breaks so late and so sharply that even the hitter, who is expecting it, often cannot process it in time. Add the splitter that arrives looking like a fastball and then drops out of the zone with the abruptness of something falling off a table. Add the curveball. Add the sequencing complexity of a pitcher who thinks about the game with the analytical depth of a strategist and the instinctive sharpness of someone who simply feels the moment better than almost anyone alive. Catching all of that, every 5 days, at the level of precision that Ohtani's pitching demands, is something that a small number of catchers in professional baseball are genuinely equipped to do. Rushing, over time, had come to understand that he was not one of them. The moment the relationship broke, the specific inning, the specific pitch, the specific sequence of events that pushed Rushing from struggling to finished, happened in a game that most of the casual baseball audience had already forgotten about by the time any of this became public. It was a mid-inning visit to the mound. Rushing had called for a sweeper on a 1-2 count against a hitter who had been sitting on the fastball all game. The call was reasonable. It was the call the pre-game meeting had identified as the high-percentage choice in exactly that count against exactly that type of hitter. Rushing was following the plan. Ohtani shook it off. Rushing re-signed. Same pitch. Ohtani shook it off again. What followed was a signed sequence that took longer than it should have in a 1-2 count, long enough that the umpire glanced toward the mound, long enough that the hitter stepped out of the box, long enough that the television broadcast cut to a close-up of Ohtani's face that several commentators noted looked unusually tight for a pitcher who was otherwise in complete command of the game. They eventually settled on a pitch. Ohtani threw it. The hitter popped it up in foul territory and the inning ended without damage. But something had been damaged anyway. After the game, behind closed doors, the conversation between Rushing and the pitching staff was described by one person present as the most honest and the most uncomfortable exchange that had taken place in that clubhouse all season. Rushing said, in private first and then eventually in public, "I don't know what he wants from me out there. I call the right pitch. I call it again. He shakes me off. And when I finally figure out what he wants, half the time I can barely hold on to it when it arrives. I am doing everything I know how to do. And it is not enough. It is not close to enough. And I am done pretending otherwise." When the release came, it was handled with the institutional cleanliness that organizations bring to decisions that have been made carefully over time rather than reactively in a single difficult moment. The Dodgers' statement was brief. Professional. It thanked Rushing for his contributions, wished him well, and moved immediately to the announcement of his replacement. No drama in the language. No suggestion of conflict or failure or the months of quiet difficulty that had preceded the decision. But Rushing, when he spoke publicly for the first time after the release, did not use institutional language. He said what he felt. Directly. Without the protective coating of professional courtesy that most players apply to these moments, like a layer of insulation between their actual experience and the public record of it. He said, "I want to be honest because I think honesty serves this situation better than the alternative. I struggled catching Shohei. Not because of effort. Not because of preparation. I put in the work. I watched the film. I studied the sequencing. I did everything that was asked of me and more. But there is a difference between preparing to catch a pitcher and being built to catch a pitcher. And I came to understand, over the course of this season, that I am not built for what he does. His pitches at that velocity, with that movement, arriving at that angle, my hands, my framing, my ability to process what's coming and position my body to receive it cleanly, it wasn't there. And the gap between what he needed and what I could give him was hurting him. I could see it in his face after certain pitches. I could feel it in the way our communication broke down in important moments. I don't want to catch his pitches anymore. Not because I don't respect what he is. But because I respect it enough to admit that someone else can serve it better than I can." The room, when he finished, was quiet for a long time. The response to Rushing's statement split along predictable lines. One camp heard courage. They heard a professional athlete doing something almost vanishingly rare in elite sports, voluntarily, publicly, and without apparent bitterness, acknowledging the specific limits of his own capability in a specific situation. Not making excuses. Not redirecting blame toward the pitcher or the coaching staff or the organization. Simply saying, "This is what I could do, and this is where that ended, and someone else should do what I couldn't." The other camp heard something more complicated. They heard a statement that, whatever its intentions, placed a portion of the catching difficulty at Ohtani's feet. That suggested the problem was not merely Rushing's limitations but the nature of what Ohtani asks of a catcher, the difficulty, the complexity, the physical demands that even a prepared and motivated professional found himself unable to meet consistently at the level required. That second reading traveled fast. It reached people who began asking, out loud and in print, whether the issue was bigger than one catcher. Whether the real story was not Rushing's departure but something about the sustainable architecture of what Ohtani does every 5 days and what it costs the person crouching behind the plate to receive it. The Dodgers did not engage with that framing publicly. Instead, they introduced the new catcher. His name is Daniel Alvarez. 3 years. A contract structure that signals not a stopgap solution or a temporary bridge while the organization assessed its longer-term options, but a deliberate, considered commitment to a specific vision of what the Ohtani-catcher partnership should look like going forward. Alvarez is 31 years old. He has spent the past 6 seasons in the American League catching a staff that included, at various points, 2 of the hardest throwers currently active in professional baseball. His framing numbers are among the best in the sport. His pitch-blocking metrics, the specific category of catching performance that becomes most relevant when you are receiving a sweeper that breaks 8 inches at 145 km/h, place him in the top 3% of all catchers in the modern era. But the number that the Dodgers front office returned to most often when making this decision was not any of those. It was a different number entirely. In 6 seasons behind the plate, Alvarez has caught a total of 14 no-hitters and perfect game bids extending into the 6th inning or beyond. 14. Across different pitchers, different stadiums, different atmospheric conditions and lineup compositions and situational pressures. The front office's internal analysis concluded that this number was not coincidental. That it pointed to something specific in the way Alvarez works with elite pitching, a quality of presence, of communication, of real-time adjustment that creates conditions in which the best pitchers he has caught have consistently performed above their established baseline. In other words, he makes great pitchers better. That was the profile the Dodgers were looking for. That was the profile they found. Dave Roberts introduced Alvarez to the media with the measured enthusiasm of a man who had been involved in the decision at every stage and believed in it completely but was not willing to oversell it before a single pitch had been thrown. He said, "We needed someone who could meet Shohei where he is. Not ask him to adjust to the catcher. Not build a relationship around compromise. We needed someone whose preparation, whose instincts, and whose physical tools were already operating at a level where Shohei doesn't have to come down to meet him. Daniel gives us that." A reporter asked whether the rushing situation, specifically his public statement, had accelerated the timeline of the decision. Roberts said, "Will was honest. I respect that. And his honesty confirmed what we had already been working through internally. The timeline was the timeline. But I'll say this, when a player is honest enough to tell you what they genuinely feel, that clarity is useful. It removes ambiguity. And removing ambiguity is how organizations make good decisions." Alvarez spoke briefly at the introductory press conference. He was not a man who reached for big language. He was compact and direct in the way of someone who has spent his career in the practical, physical, unglamorous work of catching baseballs thrown by exceptional people and has never felt the need to dress that work in anything more than what it actually is. He said, "I've watched Shohei pitch for a long time. I know what he does. I know what he needs behind the plate. I've been preparing for this assignment for longer than this organization has been thinking about me for it. I'm ready." A reporter asked, "Have you spoken with him yet?" Alvarez said, briefly, "This morning." The reporter asked, "What did he say?" Alvarez paused for just a moment. Then said, "He said show me what you've got." And for the first time since the press conference began, he smiled. Somewhere across town, Will Rushing was packing up a locker that had been his for parts of 3 seasons. He did it without ceremony. Without the lingering, backward-glancing quality that departure sometimes carries when a place has meant something significant to the person leaving it. He packed efficiently and cleanly, the way a professional packs when he understands that the next chapter begins the moment the current one is finished. Someone asked him, on his way out, whether he had any message for whoever came after him. He stopped. Thought about it for a genuine moment. Then said, "Tell them to get their hands ready. And I mean that seriously. Whatever they think they know about receiving a baseball, whatever preparation they've done, whatever elite pitching they've caught before, multiply it. And then multiply it again. And even then, you won't be fully ready for the first time you get down in that crouch and he releases a pitch at full intent." He picked up his bag. Then said one final thing, quietly, almost to himself. He said, "But when you frame it perfectly, when you receive it exactly right and the glove doesn't move and the umpire sees exactly what it was, there is nothing like it. There is nothing in baseball like it." He walked out the door. And behind home plate, for the first time in a Dodgers uniform, Daniel Alvarez got down in his crouch. And waited.